Okay, so now we're going to talk about construction of a tailored collar. And this PDF is on Blackboard under Learning Resources. And what's good about this? What's good about this is that it really shows you the different parts of the collar, what things are called. I was very surprised when I found out that line that runs into the neckline is called a gorge line. How you would know that, I don't know. And just variations. So a regular collar, which is the one that we're doing, a regular notched collar, a dropped notch collar, which is angled down, and a peaked notch collar, which is this one here, which is pretty cute. This also has some good instructions of how to draw a tailored collar. Because the thing is, when in your drawing, you really need to show the fact that, you know, like the fronts cross over, and how to put that into the drawing. And the fact too that the collar actually goes around the neck. So you can see these lines that are just sneaking around the back of the neck here. So, you know, you can't have a collar, you shouldn't have a collar that's sort of, you know, has a you can see the collar in the back, but the front is completely flat against the body. So always think about a collar as going around the neck. Now, the construction that we're doing today can be used for any coat or jacket block. It can be used for a shirt block or a dartless block as well. Technique is the same. Today we're using the semi-fitted jacket block, which is the block that was used to create this pattern here for the jacket, and we're going to use the measurements from this jacket for our pattern today. The design of the neck should be considered. So when you start with your block, you need to alter the neckline of your block before you start making the collar. Otherwise, if you alter the neckline but then use the neckline from the block to create the collar, one's not going to fit onto the other. And generally, the bigger the collar design, the larger the neckline that it should fit onto. This method works for single or double-breasted styles, and I have a sample of a double-breasted one here. So you can see that this is just a much longer line that sweeps across the body, that fold of the lapel. And there's also an option too. This one is just one whole piece, which is what we'll be doing. But you can see where there's that fold line along there. That's called the roll line. And you have an option to actually put a little stand in here as well, just to give it that extra structure. But we're not talking about that today, so you can ask a technician about that. And the measurements that we're using for our construction are designed measurements. This collar shape is what you design. So the measurements change, but the technique stays the same. And so this, and the shape and the size of the collar is what you're actually designing when it comes to a tailored collar. So there are lots of little steps here. So we'll just get straight into it. So again, I'm working in half scale. So we just need to begin with to mark out our front, and we have a drill hole there. It's a bit hard to see on this pattern, but the drill hole there is for the bust point. So I'll just pop that in. I'm not using the rest of the dart because we're just constructing the front and the neckline at this stage. So that's where that line is there. So we're starting, as I said, if you want to make the neckline bigger, there's some, I thought there were some guidelines, no guidelines. Make the neckline bigger before you start the construction. The first thing we need to do is to add our front extension. So on this sample and on this jacket, we have a 2 centimeter extension. So that means that when the jacket is buttoned up, the fronts cross over 4 centimeters, and that's a little bit bigger than you need on most jackets. But generally, the bigger the button that you have on your jacket, the wider the extension needs to be. And 2 times the extension makes the crossover, which is that 4 centimeters that I just mentioned. So I'm going to add my 4 centimeters down the front here. And I'm going to bring this point, so this is the bust point, and I'm going to have that, just have that as my guide. And so there are no, and that's that level there. So this, the top button would go at that point to help control it. And the reason that you need, if you've got a fitted jacket, if your jacket has darting, you need to keep the, the buttoning at the front at that same level. If you had the button closer, further down, then that's where the collar will roll back to, and it won't give you the support that you need around the bust to keep the shaping that's created by the darts. And the same on the waist. If you have a fitted waist, then you need a button at the waistline as well to hold, like the fit in place around the body. Otherwise, it's just going to distort and do strange things. So if we had another one, so this is our, our top button here, and we have another one down at the waist level. So we'd have another button here. And because they're, we need some support in the middle, we'd probably put another one in the middle of those two. Sorry. So to start the construction, of our collar, we need to draw in the roll line. And so the roll line starts at this point here, at our extension point. And the roll line is this literally here, the line where the facing rolls out and becomes the lapel, and that line that continues around the back of the neck. So to draw our roll line in, we need to come out from our shoulder point here, which is marked at point B on the diagram here. We need to come out 2 centimeters. So again, mine's half scale, so I'm only coming out 1 centimeter, and then we need to join those 2 lines together. Okay, so that's our roll line for our collar. Now we're going to actually start designing the collar shape. So what we'll do, where are we here? So we're going to come down our collar, and this is this section here. So we're designing the width of the lapel, the notch, and the top collar here. So from our neckline here, neckline shoulder point, we're going to come down 7.5 centimeters to mark, that's point D. And we're going to, and this is a bit tricky, so I've said to come out, so this line from D out to E is 9 centimeters, and then from A up to E is 19 centimeters. So what I would do there to get that angle is just to not draw a line to start with, but just put a mark which is 4.5 centimeters, 9 centimeters away from point D. And then we can go up from our break point here, we go up towards that line, our 19 centimeters. And you can see 19 centimeters up there is just that point there. So that was pretty lucky. And then I can draw in the actual shape. So this is the shape of our lapel, actually on this side here. So this is that one that we've just drawn there. And then from E to F is 4.5, and from F to G is around the same. So if we come back in, 4.5, 4.5, and then out, and just draw that line out so that it looks, this can be designed in any way. So, but I've just drawn that out there, and that ends up being about 4 centimeters from here to here. But you can just see that by eye, and so that's the start of our collar. So this is the bottom section here on our collar that we've just drawn in, or this one on this side here. So now, because we've drawn it with the collar lying flat back against the body, our pattern piece though, we actually need, we need that collar attached to the front of our garment here. So we've drawn it like that to see the shape. Now we need to make sure that it goes on the other side of that roll line so we get the complete jacket shape. So what you can do here, an easy way of transferring this onto the other side, well, there are two methods. One method is to use the roll line as a mirror line. So whatever measurement you come out from there, you would come out on the other side, and then do that the same for these other points as well. An easier way of doing it though is literally just to use your roll line. So fold your pattern. This is my problem with this is that you do actually fold your pattern. So, which, and I don't usually like patterns that have fold lines in them, but it is a nice, easy way to get your head around the fact that, you've got the roll line there. So I've used my tracing wheel to get those pieces, and then I just join the lines up. Okay, so that's our collar on the other side, fold it over. So now we just need, I think what I might do now is I'm actually going to rub out that neckline there, because it can get a little bit confusing having all of these lines, because there's quite a lot of construction lines here. So what we need to do now is we're just going to extend this. So this is E here, going to extend the line E to D through D a couple more centimeters. It's probably about 3 centimeters. And then using your shoulder line as a guide, we want to draw a right angle in both directions from point B. So this is point B, where your shoulder meets your neckline here. And we want to draw, using the shoulder as your right angle, we want to draw a line that goes down to that new extension there and back up about 10 centimeters. So you can see what we've drawn is this line. So we've extended this line here. Now we've just drawn this line up here. And this is going to be the front. So what we've drawn there is this corner here, and then that line continues up. And that's our back neckline, but on this piece it's also the back of the collar. So now from what we need to do, so the back from B on the shoulder, measure the back neck measurement plus 5 millimeters. And important to note that this is the measurement of the back neck of the pattern. So to get that measurement, you literally find the block, our back block, and you measure the back neckline. So that's the measurement that we're working for, because obviously these two blocks go together and your front neckline goes into your back neckline there. Remember though that not to measure your block. If you've altered your neckline on your base pattern, make sure that you use your new altered neckline measurement, not the block measurement. So that measurement together, so the back neck is 7.3, and we're adding an extra 5 millimeters onto that as well. And the 5 millimeters is because the back neck has a curve, and the collar is actually on the straight grain. So this the neckline tends to stretch a little bit, so that extra 5 millimeters is to take that give into the curve into account. So we've got a 7.8 centimeter measurement, which is that long, measuring from B up to point I here. And now what I want to do is, using B as a pivot point, I want to swing that line back here. So it's going to go from I to J, swinging back. Now, a way that you can do this is to getting my numbers here, is just to measure a little line, measure the distance from that point to a line parallel to this one back 2.5 centimeters. And now we're going to, because we want this to swing that 7.8 centimeters, we're going to swing that back off from the point B so that it touches that new line there at our 7.8 centimeter distance. Okay, so now here's another an instance where this line here tends to get in the way of the next steps, and it's really important that you have these reference lines here and that you use them to get right angles. So what I would do now is actually rub out that line there, just so that it gets it out of the equation. Now we're drawing from, so from this point here, so this is our center back neck of the collar pattern. We want to use this line here as our guideline to create a right angle coming away from that line. Okay, so this angle here needs to be a right angle. And that's why it's good to get rid of that first line, because sometimes you go out that way, which really messes things up. So we've got rid of that line, and we're using this point here, which is J in our on our diagram. And from that center back neck point there, we're going to come up 2.5 for our collar stand, which is from J to I, and 4.5 from I to K. Okay, so this is the top. So that line, this corner here is the center back. Which way does it go? So we've drawn from here up to here, and now we've drawn that as a right angle. So that distance there on the collar is that distance there. So again, from K point, that is, now we need to connect K at the center back down to our notch on the front of the collar. Now it'll have to start off at a right angle. So using, your line that's already there, put that underneath your grading ruler, and then start this. Now you can see that if I take that line directly down, I'm going to miss this corner. So what happens is that you start at a right angle and then you flare it out slightly so that it intersects with the corner of our collar notch there, and that's point G. And then the last thing we're going to do is just extend this line as a reference line. We're going to take this line around from the center back, our roll line, and then we're going to blend that into our roll line here that goes down to our break point. And that's just a reference line. That won't affect any of the pattern from now on. We're still going to do that as a whole pattern, but that's just a good reference line to have in case you need to make alterations. Okay, so not finished just yet. And I thought too, because we have, because this is in half scale, it's quite small, I thought I would go to a full scale version. So this is one I prepared earlier. And we're going to use this pattern here to create our collar pieces. And that is actually going to fit. So I'm just going to cut this off. So I'm going to position this. So what we need, this is our collar. This is the center back, which has to be on the fold. So I'm just going to trace off our collar piece. If there's a straight line, you don't have to roll along the whole line with the tracing wheel. You can just have the beginning and the end and then draw a line in between. But lines like this one, which is curved, and that neckline there, which is curved, you need to do the whole line. And then just put a little cross line where your shoulder is, because that's a reference point we need for when we're sewing our collar back onto our neckline again. And then also a notch there where the collar intersects with the gorge, the lapel on the gorge line. Everybody's new favorite word. So you probably can't see these lines, but I'm just tracing over the tracing wheel lines here. So we've got our shoulder notch there. This is our center back, and we've got the point that intersects with the lapel here. So where are we at here? Okay, so this is only half our collar. Sometimes you can be it can seem like an easy thing just to add seam allowances to this piece and cut it out and then say, oh, that's the center back, so I'm just going to put the center back on the fold of the fabric. But for pieces that are this small, you know, even having that, if you're slightly off with this on the fold of the fabric, it can really throw out the shape of the collar. So for pieces like this, I always say that you should have a whole pattern piece, not only half. So what I would do then, actually what I do, before I do that other piece, oh, that's all right, I'll do it this way. So fold along that line, and then trace this out again. Sometimes too, you get to this point and you go, oh, I'm just going to add seam allowance to this piece and then cut it out. But the thing is, as you're cutting out, the layers can move. And so, you know, like it'll be easier to do, but you might end up with a distorted shape that's really not properly mirrored, you know, from one side to the other. So there's our whole collar piece. Our grain line will be the center back there. And now around this piece, actually this is full scale, so I'm going to add a whole 6mm seam allowance around all of these lines. I just mentioned too, if your pattern piece, if you do this to your pattern piece and there's an angle at the center back here on either side of the neckline, it means that you've done something wrong in regard to your construction. So you'll have to go back to this point and make sure you've got right angles, you know, at both of these corners here, because it can really, it just won't sew onto the neckline and it'll be completely distorted in the final sample anyway. So just keep that in mind. I mean, it's something that you should have picked up at this stage anyway, but just in case. So there are seam allowances. Mark the notches on the shoulder. And now we're going to do our undercollar. So we just need to cut this out. And our undercollar is actually cut as a pair. So I'm only going to cut out half of the collar just to save time. Okay, so the instructions for the undercollar, we have to trace around. And remember when you're tracing around this too that you've got those seam allowances included, so don't add extra seam allowances on top of these. So we've traced around that. We're going to take off from this top edge. You can see on the sample here that when this folds back, this is the outer edge. So this top edge here is this one here. You can see on the pattern there. You can see that this the top collar rolls under as it joins onto the underneath collar. So this one here, it looks like the under collar has been trimmed back. Well, it's probably only 2 or 3 millimeters, but because the undercollar is on the bias, it's stretched and rolled it over a little bit more. But you can see that it just means that, like you have this really lovely finished edge along here, and you don't have, like you don't see the bits of the undercollar, out at the edge there. You just see this nice roll. So we're going to take off, I'm going to take off 3 millimeters. Okay, now that's 3 millimeters that's cut off this way. So when we cross out the original line, when we draw in our seam allowance, the seam allowance will still come in from our new line. Okay, so you can draw that in. Draw out the seam allowances into. And because we're going to cut the undercollar on the bias, the bias means that it's going to be, the grain line is going to be a lot stretchier. So it'll have a lot more give in this here. So because it's going to stretch this way, we're going to, and this is our center back. So our center back line here, we're actually going to trim that off by 5 millimeters. So we're going to draw a line in 5 millimeters from that line there. So this will be our new center back for the undercollar. And then from that line, we're going to add on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now, this is the only seam allowance on our collar or our neckline, which is 1 centimeter. And the reason that we want that's this line here. So let's sit like that. So this is the pattern piece that we've created. And the reason we want this to be 1 centimeter is because this seam allowance gets pressed open, and it's easier for a seam to be, when it's pressed open, if it's a wider seam. If it was only 6 mil, it's harder to keep that the smaller seam allowance open once it's pressed. That's why this one is a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Okay, so and because this is going to have a bit of give in it, I haven't put in a shoulder notch on our undercollar like we have on this one here, but it's quite a short distance anyway, and so it'll fit into place as you're sewing. Final thing we need to do on this piece is to find the bias grain line so that we can actually cut the undercollar on the bias. So using this point down here on the center back neckline, if you go up 5 centimeters, which is the width of your grading ruler, and then out another 5 centimeters, it's sort of like you're creating a square, and then you join your your beginning and your end point together. Okay, and that will give you a bias, and a bias is the 45-degree grain line, off your warp and your weft threads. So that'll make that that piece have a lot more give. And you've got some information here on labeling patterns as well. So that's the construction for your front neck. I haven't done the rest of the front here because we've just been concentrating on the collar and the neckline. But it just goes to show how this construction can be used, whatever the design of the rest of your garment is like. Actually, I have that. I don't have any cut instructions on here. So your undercollar will be cut 1 pair. Your top collar will be cut 1 and then cut 1 fusing or interfacing. And then your front pieces will obviously be, whatever the rest of the garment is. Another really important thing when you trace off your neckline, which is, this line here, is that it's really important to remember to notch that point where the collar intersects with the lapel on the gorge line there. So that's a very important construction point. Okay, and that's your tailored collar.